The island of Iwo Jima was a wound of ash and rock jutting from the Pacific, black sand hiding the bones of volcanoes. In February 1945, beneath Mount Suribachi's shadow, Private First Class Tadashi Yamamoto crouched inside a reinforced bunker, clutching a half-torn notebook. His handwriting shook as he pressed words onto the page, words that, if seen by his officers, would have meant death. "The Americans are not like us," he wrote. "They should have broken by now. But they don't die like other men." He had just witnessed something that shredded every lesson the Imperial Army had burned into his mind. 6 U.S. Marines charged his position through a storm of lead. 3 were cut down instantly. The rest kept coming. When grenades rained against the wall, one Marine threw himself over the blast to shield the others, then crawled forward bleeding, firing until his body simply stopped moving. Moments later, the bunker fell silent except for American voices echoing through the tunnel. In less than 5 minutes, the position that had taken weeks to fortify was gone. Across the island, 21,000 Japanese soldiers were buried inside an underground maze of tunnels, chambers, and machine gun nests. Their orders were absolute: no surrender, no retreat. They had been told their enemies were weak, pampered products of a decadent nation. Yet what they faced on that volcanic island would tear apart the very myth of Japanese invincibility. But the unraveling had started years before Iwo Jima. In 1942, on the humid, disease-ridden island of Guadalcanal, Japanese troops fought the Americans for the first time on land. To the Imperial High Command, this was supposed to be a swift victory, an easy chance to crush inexperienced soldiers before they learned how to fight. Corporal Hideo Takahashi, a veteran of the brutal campaigns in China, wrote after a week of combat, "These Americans are not like the Chinese nor the British. They fight even when surrounded. They fight at night when we cannot see. They do not fear death in the way we were told." Guadalcanal was Japan's first defensive battle in the Pacific. When 16,000 Marines of the 1st Division came ashore, Japanese intelligence dismissed them as disciplined but soft. Within days, that assessment proved disastrous. Lieutenant Shigeru Fukudome led a reinforced company ordered to recapture Henderson Field under cover of darkness. His 200 men advanced confidently. Night attacks were a Japanese specialty, perfected through years of experience in Asia. They expected panic. Instead, they walked into a storm of perfectly coordinated fire. Machine guns, mortars, and rifles erupted from interlocking positions. Before the Japanese could regroup, the Marines counterattacked, pushing forward into the jungle. Fukudome's last diary entry, later recovered from his body, read, "They came for us in the night." The jungle itself seemed to move. "We are supposed to own the darkness, but they are ghosts." By sunrise, nearly 3/4 of his men were gone. The Marines had lost 12. This became the pattern across the island. Japanese commanders sent waves of soldiers in suicidal charges. Banzai attacks meant to crush morale and overwhelm positions by sheer courage. But the Marines didn't break. They held until overrun, then fought hand-to-hand with bayonets, shovels, even bare fists. Sergeant Kenji Matsumoto, who survived Guadalcanal before evacuation, later wrote in a private letter intercepted by American intelligence, "We were taught Americans are selfish, unwilling to die for others. But I saw a Marine machine gunner continue firing with both legs shattered. When he fell, another took his weapon and fired until we killed him too. They fight for each other like brothers." To Japanese analysts, this spirit defied understanding. How could men from such an indulgent society endure so much suffering? The answer began in their training. Captured. Intelligence reports revealed early glimpses into the making of a U.S. Marine. Interrogators described a process that resembled psychological and physical destruction followed by rebirth. Recruits were stripped of individuality, rebuilt into something forged from pain, repetition, And purpose. It is like Bushido, one Japanese officer noted grimly, but mixed with American industry. That combination, a warrior's mentality and a nation's machinery, was lethal. Japanese soldiers had been raised under the code of death before dishonor, trained to fight with bravery even in hopeless situations, but their courage was trapped inside outdated weapons and shrinking supplies. The Marines, by contrast, combined the same will to die with superior firepower, endless logistics, and an iron discipline few had imagined possible. November 1943. Rear Admiral Keiji Shibasaki commanded 4,500 defenders inside what he believed was an unbreakable fortress of coral and concrete. He promised Tokyo that 1,000,000 men could not take Tarawa in 100 years. The 2nd Marine Division did it in 76 hours. Private Tadashi Ogawa, one of just 17 survivors, later told interrogators, "We killed hundreds in the first wave." The sea turned red, but more came. The 2nd wave died on the beach. More came. The 3rd wave reached us with flamethrowers. They kept coming even as we shot them down. It was as if they did not care about dying. Tarawa was proof that the Marines would seize any objective, no matter the cost. Over 6,000 men were killed in 3 days. But the island was theirs. Captured Japanese documents afterward labeled the Marines as shock troops, fanatically devoted to mission completion. Commanders noted that Marine units do not retreat and will counterattack even when tactically defeated. By 1944, Japanese officers studying these battles tried to understand the difference between Marines and ordinary U.S. infantry. Captain Yoshio Kobayashi, who survived Guadalcanal, summarized it in his analysis. The American Army is cautious. The Marines advance like fire. They accept losses that any rational commander would avoid. They turn death into calculation. To Japanese eyes, Marine tactics bordered on insanity. Charging through machine gun fire, attacking strongholds without hesitation, and pressing forward even when half a platoon lay bleeding behind them. But what seemed reckless was actually a system. Every assault, no matter how costly, was designed to break through faster than the enemy could react. On Peleliu, Lieutenant Colonel Kunio Nakagawa had built his defenses assuming Americans would pause after landing to regroup, as any logical commander would. Instead, the Marines hit his positions immediately, securing half the airfield before sunset. Nakagawa wrote bitterly in his final note, "I planned for soldiers. I did not plan for men who refused to act like them." For Japanese soldiers watching these attacks, the effect was psychological as much as physical. They saw men who appeared immune to fear, willing to die to reach an objective, and protected by a machine of endless supplies. Sergeant Matsumoto, captured months later, described watching a Marine platoon attack a fortified hill under withering fire. They charged without artillery, without smoke. We cut them down, but they kept moving. When the last few reached our position, they destroyed us. It was over in minutes. The Japanese called it insanity. In truth, it was doctrine, an acceptance that casualties were the price of speed. Every delay meant more lives lost in the long run. The Marines calculated those numbers coldly, brutally, and advanced anyway. Major Yoshi Takahuri, a senior staff officer on Iwo Jima, reflected after the war. General Kuribayashi understood we could not stop them. Our tunnels were meant to delay them, not defeat them. We inflicted over 20,000 casualties in just over a month. Any normal army would have collapsed. The Marines only brought in more men. The math was impossible to ignore. Japan's defenders were isolated, finite, and cut off from reinforcements. The Americans had factories, fleets, and 50 Marine divisions, either in the field or training at home. For every Marine who fell, another was already on a ship crossing the Pacific. The Imperial Army could not fight against arithmetic. Even the elements of war favored the Americans. Their logistics, Ships, air cover, medical support were relentless. On Saipan, a captured Japanese lieutenant described sneaking toward the beachhead after 3 days of combat, expecting chaos and exhaustion. Instead, he said, we saw soldiers eating hot food and trucks delivering ammunition under electric light. Their wounded were being treated in tents. Their dead were already buried. It was as if the war did not touch them the way it touched us. Every Japanese casualty was permanent. Every Marine casualty was a number on a list, soon replaced by a man stepping off a transport ship. That was the secret horror of Japan's Pacific War. Not just the enemy's courage, but his abundance. A machine that could feed, arm, and reinforce itself endlessly. By the time Yamamoto faced the Marines again at Iwo Jima, he already knew what was coming. He had seen the reports, read the diaries, heard the rumors whispered in the dark about Americans who fought through the night, who didn't surrender, who rose from waves of fire as if death itself couldn't hold them. Now, crouched in his bunker beneath Suribachi, he knew the truth. The Americans were not superhuman. They were ordinary men made extraordinary by will, by discipline, and by the crushing weight of an industrial giant behind them. And for the first time, Yamamoto understood what Japan's generals refused to admit. The battle had been lost long before it began. The Americans were not just coming. They were unstoppable. By late 1944, the Pacific had become a graveyard of Japan's ambitions. What began as a war of conquest had turned into a slow, suffocating collapse, measured in islands, miles, and lives. On the coral ridges of Peleliu, Colonel Kunio Nakagawa's garrison embodied the new Japanese reality. His orders were simple but absolute: hold, delay, and die. For more than 2 months, his men resisted an unrelenting American assault that should have ended in a week. They fought from limestone caves and tunnels scorched by flame and smoke, surrounded by the corpses of friends who had fulfilled their duty. When the 1st Marine Division finally withdrew in exhaustion, it had left a third of its strength on the island, killed, wounded, or broken by heat and fire. The Marines had been replaced by soldiers of the 81st Infantry Division, who finished the job in November 1944. The cost was staggering, but the outcome was never in doubt. The arithmetic of the Pacific War had reached a grim equilibrium. Japan could no longer stop the Americans, only slow them. For every island taken, the Imperial Army lost thousands of irreplaceable soldiers. The Americans, by contrast, simply buried their dead, treated their wounded, and brought in replacements. Factories in Michigan and Pennsylvania were already building the ships and shells for the next assault. Japan's military leadership understood this imbalance by the middle of 1944. Intelligence. Reports captured on Tinian confirmed what many officers already suspected. There was no longer any expectation of victory. New defensive manuals distributed to garrison commanders reflected this hopeless realism. When defending against a Marine assault, one document read, "Do not expect to hold positions indefinitely. The objective is to delay the American advance sufficiently to enable other operations. Each day of resistance is valuable. Each Marine killed or wounded is valuable. But the position will fall. Prepare accordingly. Accept that you will die in the defense. Your sacrifice buys time for the Empire." It was a philosophy of death shaped by necessity. If the Empire could not win, it would bleed slowly, making each conquest so costly that perhaps the Americans would seek negotiation instead of annihilation. The defenders no longer fought for victory. They fought for delay, for symbolism, for honor. But the Americans were immune to this kind of calculation. Marine divisions accepted losses that would have shattered other armies. They paid the price demanded by the Japanese strategy and continued forward without pause. At Tarawa, on a tiny atoll no larger than Central Park, over 1,000 Marines died in 76 hours of combat. Private Tadashi Gawa, one of the few Japanese survivors, later recalled the psychological shock. After the first day, he wrote, "We knew we would lose. The Marines kept coming. We killed them by the dozens, and still they advanced. We fought for 3 days with absolute commitment. We died almost to the last man, and they took the island on schedule." That realization spread through the Japanese military like a contagion. If the enemy could accept unlimited casualties, then the strategy of attrition, the idea of making invasion too costly, was meaningless. Yet the Imperial Army had no alternative. When the Marines landed on Iwo Jima in February 1945, every Japanese defender already knew the truth. They would die. The island would fall. And the only remaining question was, how many Americans would die with them? General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, commander of Iwo Jima's defense, understood this better than anyone. Unlike many of his peers, he had studied in the United States. He had seen Detroit's automobile plants, the endless assembly lines that could transform steel into weapons faster than Japan could count them. His orders to his men rejected the illusions of earlier battles. "We cannot win this fight," he wrote. "We can only make the Americans bleed for every meter of ground. Accept death, inflict casualties, delay their advance. This is how we serve the empire." Kuribayashi's realism was rooted in bitter experience. Since Guadalcanal, Japanese units had been destroyed one after another by Marine forces that fought with relentless precision. The first to understand this had been Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki. In August 1942, he led 900 men against Marine positions along the Tenaru River. Japanese doctrine celebrated the night attack, the swift, silent bayonet charge that overwhelmed inferior enemies. Ichiki expected another triumph. Instead, he met the 1st Marine Raider Battalion, veterans trained for nocturnal warfare. At 1:30 a.m., the Raiders opened fire with machine guns and pre-sighted artillery. The Japanese were trapped in the open, illuminated by burning palm trees and muzzle flashes. Within 20 minutes, Ichiki's battalion ceased to exist. More than 700 Japanese lay dead. Marine casualties totaled 35. It was the first clear proof that courage alone could not defeat the industrial firepower of the United States. Though the Raiders were eventually absorbed into regular Marine divisions, their methods, night patrols, small unit autonomy, coordinated firepower became the foundation of Marine tactics. By 1944, every Marine infantry battalion fought 24 hours a day. There was no pause, no darkness to hide in. Corporal Hideo Takahashi, captured on Okinawa after fighting on 3 other islands, remembered it vividly. "We used to control the night," he said. Against the Marines, there was no night, no rest, no silence. Artillery fired all night. Patrols infiltrated our lines. Airplanes bombed by day. We were hunted constantly until none of us remained. This constant pressure reflected not only training, but the industrial scale of American warfare. The Marines were not a band of warriors fighting by instinct. They were the sharp end of an entire economy. Each rifle, each flamethrower, each landing craft represented a system of production designed to support a single objective: destruction. Second Lieutenant Saburo Endo, an artillery observer on Saipan, described the shock of witnessing it. "For 3 hours before the landing," he wrote, "their ships fired without pause. Then the aircraft came and bombed us for 2 more hours. When the Marines landed, tanks and artillery moved with them. Every time we stopped them, they called battleship fire that erased our positions. They did not fight with courage or cleverness. They fought with resources. We fought with rifles. They fought with an entire industrial nation." Endo's diary captured the essence of Japan's predicament. The Pacific War was not a contest of spirit or tactical brilliance. It was a collision between a resource-starved empire and a nation whose factories could build more planes, more tanks, more men than the enemy could destroy. The Marines were the manifestation of that imbalance, trained to absorb punishment, coordinated to exploit endless supply. Kuribayashi understood that perfectly when he designed Iwo Jima's defenses. He forbade the wasteful banzai charges that had characterized earlier battles and built a defense in depth designed to make every yard of ground lethal. Beneath the island's volcanic rock, his engineers carved 11 miles of tunnels linking 1,500 positions, caves, bunkers, and hidden artillery chambers. Every beach was pre-sighted for mortar and machine gun fire. From the moment the first wave of Marines hit the sand on February 19, 1945, they were under perfectly coordinated bombardment. Within minutes, the beach turned black, not only from the volcanic sand, but from smoke and blood. Marines were cut down as they struggled to move forward. Tanks bogged down in ash and craters. Naval bombardment had destroyed almost nothing. From invisible positions, Japanese gunners raked the landing zones. For a moment, it seemed as if Kuribayashi had achieved the impossible, a victory of preparation over overwhelming force. But then came the familiar pattern, the rhythm that had repeated from Tarawa to Saipan. The Marines did not retreat. They advanced. Through artillery and machine gun fire, they crawled forward, inch by inch, finding and exploiting the narrow gaps between Japanese strongholds. When a bunker stopped them, demolition teams crawled forward under fire to blow it apart. When those men died, others took their place. The attack never stopped. Private First Class Tadashi Yamamoto recorded the experience from his bunker. "A Marine with a flamethrower came toward us," he wrote. "We shot him. His assistant picked up the weapon. We killed him. A third man took it and continued even while bleeding. When he fell, another Marine came. We killed them all, but by then the engineers had reached our entrance. They threw grenades. The bunker was lost. This happened again and again. Within an hour, 30 such positions had been overrun. The Japanese defenders realized the futility of resistance against men who refused to stop. 70,000 Marines landed on Iwo Jima. 26,000 became casualties, nearly 7,000 killed. Every one of the island's 21,000 Japanese defenders died, save for a handful too wounded to resist capture. It was the most brutal expression of Marine doctrine. Advance, destroy, endure. Kuribayashi's last message, smuggled from the ruins before his death, acknowledged the terrible truth. "The Marines," he wrote, "are the most effective fighting force I have ever faced. They possess attributes that make them uniquely dangerous: discipline, coordination, and an acceptance of death without hesitation. They fight as one body, supported by infinite resources. Against such an enemy, courage alone is not enough." In those few words, Japan's most capable general summarized the tragedy of the Pacific War. The empire had built its armies on faith in the indomitable will of the warrior. The United States built its Marines on industry, training, and endurance. When the two met on islands of rock and coral, spirit met machinery. And machinery won. The final year of the war would be fought under that shadow. Every Japanese soldier who stepped into a bunker or cave knew he was already dead. Every Marine who waded ashore knew he might die, but believed the advance would continue no matter the cost. The contest was not of men, but of nations. And on Iwo Jima, that contest reached its ultimate expression. One side sacrificing itself to delay the inevitable, the other sacrificing itself to finish the task. In the black volcanic sand where courage met industrial might, the outcome of the Pacific War was no longer in doubt. It had only to be endured to its end. By 1945, the Japanese command no longer asked if an island would fall, but how long it could resist before being consumed. Reports from across the Pacific described the same phenomenon again and again, an enemy that absorbed punishment beyond comprehension and kept coming. What terrified Japanese officers was not the Marines' weapons or numbers, but the realization that nothing, no loss, no obstacle, no slaughter, could make them stop. Intelligence summaries tried to explain this relentless force. Analysts identified 4 reasons. First, Marine training produced soldiers who accepted casualties that would have shattered any other army. Second, their firepower exceeded Japan's by impossible margins. 5-1 in artillery, 10-1 in air support. Third, their junior leaders, from corporals upward, had authority to act independently, making decisions at levels that Japanese officers reserved for entire companies. And fourth, and most decisive of all, the Marines never stopped attacking. There was no defense that could survive such a combination indefinitely. To fight them was to face a machine that fed on blood and momentum. Japanese soldiers could understand losing a battle to superior firepower. They could endure defeat at the hands of clever tactics. What they could not comprehend was an enemy that advanced over the bodies of its own dead, refusing to yield even when reason demanded retreat. Corporal Hideo Takahashi, who fought on 3 islands before being captured on Okinawa, described the difference in a post-war interview. "You must understand," he said, "the Marines are not like other American soldiers. The Army attacks, takes losses, then pulls back to reorganize. The Marines attack, take losses, and attack again over their own fallen. It is not military logic. It is something else entirely. That something else was forged in a place far from the battlefields of the Pacific, in the brutal crucible of Marine boot camp. Documents captured on Saipan contained the interrogation of a Marine prisoner who tried to explain this transformation to bewildered Japanese intelligence officers. Training, he said, lasted 8 weeks. For the first 4, recruits were systematically broken. Drill instructors stripped them of individuality, dignity, and comfort. "You are told you are worthless," the prisoners said, "that you'll never be a Marine, that you should quit and join the Army." The abuse was relentless, psychological, physical, and unending. Those who quit were publicly humiliated. Those who remained learned the first and final rule of the Corps: surrender is not an option. The Japanese interrogators noted the similarity to their own harsh training methods, but they missed the second phase. The next 4 weeks rebuilt what had been destroyed. Instructors taught recruits that they belonged to something eternal, a brotherhood linking every Marine who had ever fought or died. Failure was no longer personal. It was betrayal of that brotherhood. A Marine didn't advance for glory or even survival. He advanced because to stop was to dishonor the dead. This belief created a warrior the Japanese had never faced before, one whose courage was not born of desperation or fanaticism, but of identity. When such men met the last desperate banzai charges of the Pacific War, the results were catastrophic. On Saipan, October 1944, Colonel Takuya Takashima led nearly 3,000 Japanese troops in a final suicidal assault against Marine positions. The attack began before dawn, with bayonets fixed and voices screaming, "Tenno Heika Banzai! Long live the Emperor!" It was supposed to break the American line through sheer terror. Instead, it broke against it. The Marines of the 27th Infantry Division were asleep when the charge began. Within minutes, Japanese soldiers flooded their trenches. Conventional doctrine demanded retreat and regrouping. The Marines did the opposite. Officers and sergeants rallied their men in the dark, turning foxholes into fortresses. Machine guns spat fire at point-blank range. Mortars fired directly into the oncoming waves. Some Marines fought with pistols, shovels, and knives when ammunition ran dry. By dawn, the battlefield was a nightmare of bodies. 3,000 Japanese lay dead in a zone 500 meters deep. The Marines had lost 90 killed and just over 200 wounded. Private First Class Takeshi Yoshida, one of the few survivors, described his disbelief from a hospital cot before dying of infection days later. "We were told Americans feared close combat," he said. "We charged expecting them to break. They fought us hand to hand and killed us all. I saw a Marine sergeant kill 7 men before he fell. This is not cowardice. We were lied to. Those lies, the myth of a soft, weak America, died on the beaches of every island. Japanese soldiers who had been trained to see Westerners as fragile and self-indulgent watched Marines live for weeks in foxholes flooded with rain, eating cold rations, fighting in heat that melted the flesh from their hands. They fought without rest, slept beside corpses, and kept advancing. Corporal Kenji Matsumoto, who survived Guadalcanal and was later captured on Bougainville, recalled the shock of watching Marine supply chains at work. By September 1942, we ate rice twice a day, sometimes less, he said. We hunted rats and roots. The Marines ate 3 meals, always. They had water, medicine, bullets, and mail from home. They had everything. We had nothing. We realized we were fighting an enemy who would never run out. The material superiority of the Marines was as crushing as their will. Against fortified bunkers, they called artillery that fired hundreds of shells in minutes. If that failed, Sherman tanks with flamethrowers rolled forward, fire pouring from their barrels like liquid sunlight. If the tanks were stopped, demolition teams crawled through gunfire, carrying satchels of explosives. Turning caves into tombs, Lieutenant Shigeru Fuku, before his death on Guadalcanal, wrote a report analyzing Marine tactics that was later captured by Allied forces. The Marines do not fight as individuals, he wrote. They fight as parts of a single organism. Riflemen fix our position. Machine gunners suppress our fire. Mortars deliver smoke to blind us. Artillery destroys our bunkers. Tanks advance with infantry close behind. Aircraft bomb what artillery cannot reach. This happens within minutes of contact, coordinated by junior officers using radios we do not have. By the time our commanders issue orders, the Marines have already acted. That speed came from a revolutionary idea in military structure, the delegation of authority. While Japanese armies worshipped hierarchy and obedience, Marines prized initiative. A sergeant could redirect an attack, call in artillery, or change tactics on the spot. Corporals led assaults that Japanese doctrine required a lieutenant to authorize. The result was an enemy that moved like water, flowing around obstacles, appearing where least expected, adapting faster than Japanese defenses could react. And in that merciless tide, one weapon above all came to symbolize the horror of modern war, the flamethrower. Fire had no honor, no beauty, no ceremony. Corporal Hideo Takahashi, burned over half his body on Okinawa, never forgot it. We were taught to die with honor, he said. A bullet, a bayonet, these are a warrior's deaths. Fire is different. You hear men screaming as they burn. You smell them. There is no glory in that death, only terror. The Marines understood what we did not. War is not about honor. It is about killing efficiently. That realization came too late for Japan's soldiers. By 1944, the myth of spiritual superiority had crumbled. The Marines represented a new kind of warfare, industrial, coordinated, merciless. Japanese intelligence reports captured on Tinian described them in language that bordered on superstition. One such document listed the truths that could no longer be denied. First, Marines are physically larger and stronger than Japanese soldiers, the result of lifelong nutrition and medical care. Second, they are equipped with superior weapons, ammunition, and supplies. Third, their marksmanship training is unmatched. A Marine rifleman can kill at distances where Japanese fire becomes useless. Fourth, they fight under constant air and naval support that we cannot counter. And fifth, and most devastating, they do not surrender. They fight to victory or death. There is no third outcome. The report ended with instructions that revealed the full collapse of Japanese confidence. When facing Marines, it said, do not expect them to retreat. Do not assume casualties will weaken their resolve. Prepare your positions for total destruction. When defeat is certain, die where you stand. By then, the Empire's commanders knew what their men faced on every shore. The Marines were no longer simply an enemy. They were a force of nature. They came not as individuals, but as the embodiment of an industrial giant, disciplined, methodical, and unrelenting. Against them, Courage and devotion could only slow the inevitable. For the defenders trapped on the shrinking islands of the Pacific, this understanding became its own kind of despair. They were fighting a war that no longer offered victory, only the choice between death today or death tomorrow. And on every island that fell, from Tarawa to Saipan, from Peleliu to Okinawa, the same truth repeated itself like the crash of waves on coral. The Marines never stopped. They came, they bled, they buried their dead, and they came again, until there was nothing left standing before them. By 1945, the Imperial Japanese Army no longer fought to win. It fought to delay the inevitable. Reports circulated among island garrisons warning that numbers alone meant nothing against the Marines. Do not believe superiority in numbers provides advantage, one directive read. Their firepower negates numerical superiority. Do not attempt banzai charges unless no other option exists. The Marines will slaughter charging troops with automatic weapons and artillery. Do not expect them to fear the night. They fight as efficiently in darkness as in daylight. These weren't tactical manuals, they were admissions of despair. The only remaining defense was to dig in, create interlocking fields of fire, prepare fallback positions, and accept that every stronghold would eventually fall. The objective was no longer victory, but to bleed the Marines as much as possible before being annihilated. This new doctrine found its purest expression in General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, the man tasked with defending Iwo Jima. By early 1945, he understood the arithmetic of destruction better than anyone. "I am asked to defend Iwo Jima against American Marines," he wrote to his wife in January. "It is a mathematical problem with one answer. The Marines will land with 70,000 men. They will control the air and sea. They will have unlimited ammunition and supplies. My mission is not to defeat them. That is impossible. My mission is to make them pay such a price that America hesitates." Before invading Japan itself, Kuribayashi's strategy marked the final evolution of Japanese defense, from aggressive counterattack to disciplined sacrifice. His plan was to turn the island into a machine of attrition. Every bunker, every cave, every gun position was designed not to repel the Marines, but to make them bleed for every inch of ground. When the Marines landed on February 19, 1945, they faced defenses more elaborate than anything yet encountered. The black volcanic ash swallowed their boots and absorbed their shells. Pillboxes were hidden behind layers of rock. Caves connected through underground tunnels that let defenders disappear and reappear like ghosts. Every approach was covered by crossfire. Every gain measured in meters and lives. But the strategy failed in the one way Kuribayashi could not foresee. It misjudged the psychology of the Marines. High casualties didn't break them. They hardened them. Every Marine killed became a rallying point. Every platoon wiped out demanded vengeance. The worse the losses grew, the stronger their determination became. Private First Class Tadashi Yamamoto, trapped in a bunker near Mount Suribachi, wrote his final diary entry before his death. "Tomorrow the Marines will reach us. We have killed hundreds in 3 weeks. More arrive every day. They do not weaken. They do not stop. I thought our spirit was stronger than American materialism. I was wrong. They have both spirit and material. They are what we claimed to be. We are what we claimed they were." His bunker was destroyed the next morning after a 6-hour assault. All 11 defenders were killed. The Marines lost 3 men and took the position 40 minutes later, before moving on. This pattern repeated across the island for 5 relentless weeks. Thousands of bunkers, thousands of deaths. Each stronghold delayed the inevitable by minutes. When the battle ended on March 26th, the numbers told the truth of modern war. Of 21,000 Japanese defenders, nearly everyone was dead. Fewer than 200 survived, most unconscious or too wounded to resist. The Marines suffered 26,000 casualties, almost 40% of their force. Any other military would have needed months to recover. The Marines were reorganized, refitted, and back in combat within 6 weeks. That resilience became the single most terrifying fact for Japanese soldiers. They realized that even annihilation no longer stopped the Americans, it only delayed them. Corporal Kenji Matsumoto, captured and later interviewed in Hawaii, explained it bluntly. You could kill half of a Marine unit, and the rest would keep attacking. You could wound their officers, and their sergeants would take command. You could fight them to exhaustion, and they would attack again the next day. There was no way to win. It was not war, it was mutual annihilation, and they had more men than we did. Behind every Marine who fell, another waited. The industrial capacity of the United States fed the war like an endless tide. Japanese intelligence reported with disbelief that Marine divisions suffering 75% casualties at Peleliu were replenished and combat-ready within 3 months. The replacements who landed on Iwo Jima fought like veterans. Japan had no answer for that. Its training systems collapsed under the weight of losses. Replacements were rushed from school to battlefield without cohesion or equipment. Even on the battlefield, American efficiency was unmatched. Wounded Marines were treated within minutes, evacuated by air or sea, operated on in sterile hospital ships equipped with plasma, antibiotics, and surgical teams. Thousands survived wounds that would have meant certain death for their Japanese counterparts, who often died from infection or thirst within days. Captured soldiers saw this difference firsthand. They saw Americans rescuing their wounded from under fire, providing them morphine and care, while Japanese commanders left their own injured men to die. It shattered the illusion of moral superiority. After Japan's surrender, when Marines occupied the homeland, they braced for fanatic resistance. Instead, they found a nation broken and relieved. Civilians who had been taught to die for the emperor now bowed to the men they had once feared as monsters. Private First Class Takeshi Yoshida, repatriated in 1946, described his shock. Everything we were told was lies. The Marines did not torture prisoners. They gave us food, medicine, shelter. They treated us better than our own officers. The Americans were not barbarians. We were. Thousands of former soldiers echoed the same sentiment in post-war interrogations. Respect for Marine courage, bitterness toward Japanese leaders, and the dawning realization that Japan's defeat had been inevitable from the beginning. No amount of spirit could overcome a nation with both courage and infinite resources. The last message from General Kuribayashi, sent 5 days before Iwo Jima fell, captured that truth. I have fought the Marines for 31 days, he radioed. They are the finest soldiers I have ever encountered. Their training is superior. Their equipment is overwhelming. Their courage equals ours, and their numbers are endless. Japan cannot defeat such an enemy. We can only die fighting them and hope our sacrifice buys time for peace. His words were prophetic. The atomic bombs would end the war months later, but his assessment of the Marines proved timeless. They were the cutting edge of American power, the spear that broke Japan's defenses island by island. They paid a terrible price, but they never broke, never retreated, never failed to take an objective. In the final reckoning, they became what Japanese propaganda had once claimed the Imperial Army to be: invincible warriors who would rather die than surrender. But their invincibility was not mystical. It was methodical. It came from discipline, logistics, training, and an unbreakable bond among men forged in the crucible of boot camp and battle. Corporal Hideo Takahashi, interviewed 3 decades later, spoke for a generation of survivors. We were taught that spirit conquers material, he said. The Marines taught us that spirit plus material conquers spirit alone. They were as willing to die as we were, but they had tanks, artillery, aircraft, and food. We had courage and promises. That was not enough. From Guadalcanal to Okinawa, the record was unbroken. The Marines suffered 86,000 casualties 19,500 killed. But they never failed to take an island. Not once. Japanese analysts after the war concluded that the Marines represented the perfect synthesis of warrior ethos and industrial might. They combined the Bushido spirit of sacrifice with the machinery of a superpower. It was a combination no enemy could match. For the Japanese soldiers who faced them, the war ended not in defeat, but revelation. They had fought an enemy who was everything they were told Americans could never be. Disciplined, courageous, tireless, united. Against such men, courage was not enough. Determination was not enough. Nothing was enough but surrender or death. Private First Class Yamamoto's diary, recovered from the ruins of Iwo Jima, said it best. The Marines will win, not because they are braver than us, but because their nation gives them everything they need to win, and they will use it without mercy until we are gone. We are samurai with swords fighting men who have machine guns and the spirit of samurai. There was never any hope. There was only death. His words became the epitaph for an empire. The Marines proved the truth one island at a time, at a cost counted in thousands of lives, paid in full until the war was done.